I discovered that there was such a thing as arts administration, and that was it. I was like, I didn't want to be the person on stage ever. I wanted to be the one who got people there. So arts administration was for me.
Welcome to Arts Engines. I'm your host, Aaron Dworkin. And with us, we have as today's guest, Teresa Eyring, who is Executive Director of Theater Communications Group, otherwise known in the field as TCG. Welcome, Teresa.
Hi, Aaron.
It's so wonderful to have you here. And I thought I'd kind of dive in, a lot of our viewers may not fully understand kind of the scope of TCG's work. So I was wondering if you could kind of share what is the scope and breadth of what is, for anyone who doesn't know, really the service organization for theater in the country, but what does that mean?
Well, it means a lot, I'll tell you. TCG was founded in 1961, and that was when, just historically, theater was in the US was mostly focused in New York and was entirely commercial. Not all Broadway, but even off Broadway at the time didn't have a not-for-profit model that it operated with. So TCG was founded when a number of artists decided that they wanted to open theaters outside of New York, resident theater companies in communities across the country. And in fact, at that time already there were a few major ones outside of New York, but more and more artists were wanting to move in that direction, really set down roots, again, as I mentioned, across the country, work with artists in local communities, and build audiences in local communities. And after a while, there were maybe 12, 13 theaters, and they realized that they needed some kind of an association to keep them in communication with each other. And the Ford Foundation came forward and put up some money in the beginning so that they could establish TCG. And from that point on, I would say for the first couple of decades, TCG was mostly focused on fulfilling needs around professional development, really facilitated peer-to-peer learning. But TCG also, you may know Danny Newman, who founded the idea of subscription. TCG made it possible for Danny to go around the country and teach theaters how to set up subscription plans, which really catapulted the theater into a whole new realm, because what subscription did is it made it possible for theaters to take some risks on new work. It really made it engendered a sense of loyalty within audiences. So in the early days, that's what TCG was about, and we still do that. We say we were a social network before social networking even existed. We still bring people together. We do conferences, we do webinars, we do quite a bit of research on the fiscal health of the field, as well as education programs and other aspects of the field. But over time, we've evolved to also include publishing. We're the largest independent trade publisher of dramatic literature in North America. And that includes publishing plays primarily, but we also publish American Theater Magazine and Art Search. Additionally, we have a whole division within our organization that focuses on grant making and professional development of grantees. And finally, I should say, last but not only, we also are very committed to advocacy and spend quite a bit of time working in Washington with our collaborators in the Performing Arts Alliance to advocate for strong and positive arts policies, which is always important, but especially now.
Right, right. So from this perch that you have, kind of really viewing the field in its entirety, what would you say, and separate from the pandemic, which I want to get to in just a minute, but separate from the pandemic, what do you feel kind of is the biggest challenge facing theater or presented for theaters today?
The biggest challenges that we've been discussing are, one has to do with the need for our theater field to work towards being much more equitable than it has been in the past, to really recognize the structural racism that has existed over the decades, to recognize that as a theater ecology that is fairly evolved, we have enormous positives and positive impact within our communities, but the system has also replicated some of the weaknesses that exist in the larger system of our nation and that exists in other sectors as well. So one of the challenges we've been working on at TCG and that our field has been working on is just how do we become more equitable? How do we recognize that there are certain marginalized and underrepresented groups within our theater community who need to be lifted up, who need to be given and brought into access to more resources to be able to get their work done. We need to look at how some of our largest institutions and their leadership have historically been predominantly white, and that we want to see more people of color, women of color, people, again, from communities that have historically been marginalized, having access to these positions of power within our field. So that's a challenge. And as I mentioned, we've recognized it and have been working for a number of years on how we make change in that realm. Another challenge is just how do we support the artistry, and how do we think about the model for actually not only creating theater in the nonprofit context, but also really sustaining it over time. You know, funding is a big issue. And so we do look to what are some of the alternative models. That's very important to the field right now.
Right. So with the equity piece, just to dive into that a little more, there, not just in theater, but there's certainly, our, viewers of ours who might be leading or involved in a theater, or who might be in dance or music, who realize or recognize that their ensemble, their institution really has not, addressed this very important challenge or aspect. But they're like, how do we start? What should we do first? What would be your recommendation for a theater or other organizations if they want to get started to really try and have an impact in the equity space?
What's important is to recognize, to look at the structure of your own organization and make sure that there is a commitment that exists at all levels. So for example, if you have a board, which nonprofit organizations do, and you have an executive leadership level of the organization, and you also have a staff, a team, is to make sure that the board, the leadership, and the staff are all committed to focusing on equity and to recognizing where they are, and making a plan to become more equitable. And when I say making a plan to become more equitable, I know in the case of TCG, we literally made equity a strategic priority within our plan back in 2011. It had been part of TCG's DNA and interest for years before that, but we said at a point, we have to prioritize this at the strategic plan level. And we need our board sign off, we need our leadership, our staff. We need to make a plan that we really commit resources to. I mean, that's one thing too, is that it's important to put money behind it, so that you can, if you need to hire a consultant who can help the team do an assessment, an internal assessment, for example, that you have those funds. We commit funds to staff development and training, making sure that there's always an equity lens to all of our activities, whether it's our programming, our grant making, our publishing. But for any organization that's just starting out, and I have to say that across the disciplines in the performing arts field, there's been a high level of commitment, and the Performing Arts Alliance, which again is a multidisciplinary coalition, is focusing on on equity, diversity, and inclusion as well. So there's a high level of consciousness. It's just making sure that there's organization-wide commitment, that it is committed to both financially and in terms of the organization's overall strategy, and that it's consistent over time.
Awesome. Awesome. So, you have had your role at TCG, but before that, decades, in theaters, leading theaters, you live a life in the theater. Where did that passion come from? Clearly, this is your life's passion. How did that spark come about for you? Where is that passion from?
Well, I'll tell you, it started at a young age. My parents were passionate about the arts, and they thought it was important for their kids to have access to all art forms. We went to museums, we went to concerts. I had a trip to New York when I was 10 years old, which was so exciting, where we actually attended 2 Broadway shows. So I really, I had exposure early on. I think that's important for young people to recognize that arts and creativity are an important part of life, and that that they can participate. So that's what I had. And then I just continued through high school. I was really more interested in visual arts for a period of time. And then eventually I discovered that there was such a thing as arts administration, and that was it. I was like, I didn't want to be the person on stage ever. I wanted to be the one who got people there. So arts administration was for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So one of the questions I like to ask of all my guests is kind of my 3 things question. Are there 3 things, could be 3 words or 3 concepts, or just 3 drivers that you think anyone really in theater, whether they might be looking to be on stage or to follow in your footsteps and to really be the architect behind the scenes, are there 3 things that you would say, this should be in your mind, or this should be part of your philosophy or your ethos as you try to achieve your goals?
The 3 things I think about are, and I would say one of them has to do more with a practice, and it's around accountability. And that is, when you know what your goals are, as you reflect on and identify goals, I think it's so important to literally, this is very practical, but just the idea of documenting for yourself. So writing it down, and then communicating with others what your vision is and what you're trying to accomplish. So that's, I would say, document vision. I would say a second really important piece is just relationships. Relationships are so important in life in general, but I always tell interns who work with us at TCG that they should pay attention to the relationships they're making over time, and don't lose them. Don't lose them. Just stay in touch with the people who inspire you and who know things that you don't know or have resources you don't have. Stay in touch. It's just crucially important. And then finally, I would say just trust in the universe to support you along the way. I think this is also incredibly important in creative professions, to just be aware that it's not easy. It's not easy to be in the arts, and knowing that if you're clear on your vision and your goals and you're maintaining relationships, that the universe may bring you things that you weren't expecting.
Awesome. Awesome. So we're almost out of time, but wanted to kind of get your sense of, again, looking at the field, what's the future bring? As we think about the impact from the pandemic, as you look at some of the changes that are going on, once, if you will, things are, back to whatever new normal we arrive at, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, where do you see theater? Are there any key trends, things that you think will be substantially different or evolved come 5 or 10 years down the road?
Yes, well, I think this has been an extraordinary moment of disruption for all of our communities, but for and for all industries, but for theater and any art form or industry that requires bringing people together. The fact that we've had to stop and have such uncertainty about what's to come next. When will we reopen? Will we be able to reopen within 6 months, a year? I think what it's urging is to take advantage of the moment to think about a number of things. How is the art created? Is there a space where there's both live performance, but really well-defined and executed online and virtual opportunities where theater is actually made for the virtual space? There are questions. We have a saying at TCG, which is a better world for theater and a better world because of theater. So as theater reemerges and finds its new normal, if you will, and hopefully that will be a revitalized and exciting new normal, how do we help with the rebuilding? How are we part of the rebuilding of our communities and our society? So a better world for theater, a better world because of theater. I think theater is vital in life, in our communities. So I know that it will grow and continue to be central. But I think we also have this opportunity right now to really look at some of the assumptions that we've had about how theater is made, where it takes place, who's involved, how it interacts with its communities, who are some of the partners in other sectors that we might want to work with. So I see that in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see the brilliant results of that interrogation.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. And Teresa Eyring, you are truly one of the arts engines that are powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron.